This video is about the breakdown of relationships. It's for anybody who might be questioning their own romantic relationship at the moment, but it's specifically for UK A2 psychology students studying the AQA A specification. We're going to look at two theories of the breakdown of romantic relationships, so that in the exam, if a question came up that said discuss one or more theories on the breakdown of relationships, then you'd be able to answer that question fully. So the two theories we're going to look at, and the first one is Duck and Rollie's model of breakdown of relationships. And it has 6 phases. The first 3 phases are private, and the third 3 stages are public. And there's a big distinction between the two. So we're going to look at each stage in turn, and then identify the significance of those public and private stages. So before we look at that, we're just going to discuss thresholds. Duck and Rollie says that to move into each new stage of the breakdown of romantic relationships, that there is a threshold. So that means there's something that happens that pushes you over or tips you over the edge into the next stage of breakdown. So for each threshold, there is a quotation, which I'm going to put on these slides in green. So as the relationship declines, or the aggrieved partner or partners start to think in certain ways, then that means they're more likely to tip over into the threshold. So if you look at this picture here of the, you can see a path, and it forks into 2. And the more you think in a certain way, it's almost as if you're seeing the light. You can see one of the pathways has got a much stronger sunset ahead of it, and so the more you think about things, the more clear your thinking becomes in that you are going to actually leave that relationship, or at least that you'll be tipped into those next stages. You're going to cross the threshold into the next stage of breakdown, and so your path becomes much more clear. So the first stage is actually just called breakdown, and the threshold that has been reached is I can't stand this anymore. So someone in the relationship becomes dissatisfied with their partner and what's happening, and they start thinking, I can't stand this anymore. And so it could be anything. And if you're watching this and you're questioning your own relationship, you're going to know exactly what it is that you can't stand anymore. But some very common examples are things like habits like drinking and smoking, or perhaps illegal drug taking. Constantly considering others before yourself, so your partner thinks of others first, being bored, being ignored, a poor sex life, financial mismanagement, and abuse. So those are very common stages, those are very common things that a person would think that would make them become dissatisfied. And so the reason it's private is because they're thinking, I can't stand this anymore. Nobody else knows yet. It's completely private in their head. So if someone does start thinking, I can't stand this anymore, it might be about specific behaviour, then they're going to get tipped over into the next stage called the Intrapsychic Processes. So this is stage 2, also private. And the threshold that has been reached is I'd be justified in withdrawing. And what that means is the person, so whatever it is that has caused that person to become very dissatisfied, it's gone to a whole new level. So there's something that's happened that has triggered them to think, not only I can't stand this anymore, but actually I'd be justified in leaving them because their behaviour, what they have done is just, it is so abhorrent to me. It's not acceptable, especially in my eyes or the eyes of society. So in this phase, the person is thinking to themselves, it's still private, no one else knows, and they're thinking to themselves about the partner's behaviour and their inadequacies, the negative aspects of the relationship, the costs of withdrawal from actually leaving them, positive aspects of alternative relationships, and whether or not to express these to their partner. And you can see in this picture Gauguin's, I'm no artist, that's probably pronounced terribly, but you can see the brooding woman. And that's what the Intrapsychic Processes stage is. You're brooding. You're thinking about all the negative things, and you're brooding on it. But it's private. You're thinking. So a real life example of that might be, remember the threshold, something's tipped them from I'm dissatisfied right into the intrapsychic processes. So supposing, let's go for an example, supposing somebody was very fed up with their partner's drinking, perhaps their partner was a heavy drinker, and so they started to become dissatisfied with this and thought, oh, I can't stand it anymore. But then something happens that tips them into, I would be justified in withdrawing. So imagine that it's, imagine if it's a woman and she's in a heterosexual relationship and it's the man that's the heavy drinker, just for an example. So the woman, her sister is getting married, she's going to be bridesmaid for her sister. So the night before the wedding, she spent the night in a hotel with her sister, just doing last minute preparations, and her partner says, oh, I'm just going to get an early night at home and I'll ring you in the morning and we'll discuss picking you up and all the details. So in the morning, the woman rings her partner, rings in, doesn't pick up. So in the end, she rushes back to their home and walks in to find this.
Just give me something to shout about today, something new to scream about today.
So he's gone out the night before. Instead of having an early night, like he said, he's gone out the night before, had a skinful, got absolutely legless, obviously bought a kebab, come home, he's passed out on the bed, stinking out their house with kebab and horrible alcohol smells. And when she wakes him up and confronts him, he says to her, oh, you're being unreasonable, it would have been fine, loads of people do it. And she thinks, no, that is not acceptable. So that's the thing. Although the heavy drinking was annoying for her, that's what's tipped her into, I would be justified in withdrawing, because she knows that it's completely unacceptable. So it's that has caused her to go into the intrapsychic processes, which means she's brooding on his behaviour, and no matter what she's doing, suddenly that image of him passed out with a kebab on his chest just keeps coming to mind.
Just give me something to shout about today, something new to scream about today, something new to shout about today.
So the kebab incident has pushed her into the next phase, which is called the dyadic stage of breakdown. And the threshold that has been reached is I mean it. And dyadic means an interaction between two individuals. So it means that at this stage, the person is likely to try and confront their partner. They don't always, but usually they do. And at this stage, the partner becomes aware that they're unhappy. They could become involved in talks about the relationship. They could attempt repair and reconciliation at this stage, or they might assess jointly the cost of withdrawal and/or reduced intimacy. So they might actually consider as a couple about breaking up. This is the last of the private stages, because although they've actually told their partner they're unhappy, it's still private between the two of them. Nobody else is involved, so no one else knows there's a problem. And so at this stage, this is the last stage at which that you can actually, according to Dyadic and Rollie, that you can actually save your relationship, because it's still private. If they decide not to save their relationship in the dyadic phase, then they're going to be tipped into the next stage of breakdown, which is now a public stage, and it's called the social phase. And the threshold that has been reached is, it is now inevitable, which means it's going to happen, this breakdown is going to happen. And what it means is the person is making the breakup public. So they initiate gossip and discussion in their social network. They call for help and advice from friends, family, or experts. They create face-saving and blame-placing stories to tell others. And they start to negotiate with their partner about the post-dissolution phase, which means they start to negotiate what's going to happen if they break up. So this is a public phase, because they've actually started to tell people. And according to Dyadic and Rollie, that means it's going to happen. Once you start to tell others in your social network, however you decide to tell them, then that breakup is actually inevitable. The next stage is called the grave dressing phase, and the threshold that has been reached is it's time to get a new life. So in this phase, the person is dealing with the breakup. They publicly distribute their own version of the breakup story. So there are always two sides to every story, but once you've decided that the relationship is over, and it's called the grave dressing stage because imagine the relationship is just dead in the ground, it's gone, but you want to dress the grave to make it look pretty. And that means you want to make yourself look pretty. You want to make yourself look like you're trustworthy and loyal and that you can justify your actions. They strive to present themselves in the best light so they don't come across unfavourably. And that's because they want others to see that they are a good relationship prospect in the future. They also, according to Duck and Rollie, will also engage in getting over it activities. So that could be things like drinking, smoking, spending heaps of money on stuff, possibly one-night stands, and often exercise. A lot of people kick-start into an exercise routine, and it's usually quite extreme if they do that. And those are just some examples. Other people might experience other getting over it activities. And once that phase is over, you move into the last stage of breakdown, which Duck and Rollie call resurrection processes. So resurrection, coming back from the dead, and that means that you're able to then start a new relationship with somebody else. The threshold, or the reframing of past relational lives, is what I learned and how things will be different. So they prepare themselves for a new relationship by redefining themselves and building on past mistakes and experiences. So what that means is they think, right, what would I definitely not want in a new relationship? I definitely don't want a heavy drinker. I definitely don't want someone who spends all the time playing online poker. I don't want someone who ignores me and puts everybody else before me. I don't want somebody who I say, oh, what are you doing on Friday? And they say, oh, I don't know yet. And you think, well, surely you'd want to see me, but they're always putting you last. So you know what you don't want, and you decide what you do want. And it's a very reflective stage where you decide what you reflect on what you've learned from that relationship, and then you're ready for the future and you're ready for a new relationship. And it can take quite a long time to get to that final stage. Some people spend a long time in the grave dressing stage where they're kind of getting over it and they're still justifying what happened and painting themselves in a good light in that relationship. If you're in the grave dressing stage, you're not ready for the new relationship yet, according to Duck and Rollie. So that's all the AO1 material. If you're a psychology student, that's your description of Duck and Rollie's model. And you need twice as much evaluation as you do description. So we're going to evaluate Duck and Rollie's model now. And as I've been talking it through, you yourself might be thinking, well, I don't think I fully agree with everything there. The first thing we're going to look at, though, is some research support to support Duck and Rollie's model by Toshiro and Fraser, 2003. They surveyed students who had recently split up, and they found self-reports of emotional distress and personal growth, new insights into themselves, and a clearer idea about future partners. So this shows clearly that different stages of Duck and Rollie's model. The emotional distress shows evidence of the private stages, all that brooding, all that feeling dissatisfied. And the personal growth shows evidence of the resurrection processes. So Toshiro and Fraser provide support for both the public and the private stages. There are implications for intervention, which means Duck and Rollie's model stresses the importance of communication in relationship breakdown. So if you think about that dyadic stage, it's really important for the couple to talk to each other if they're going to actually save their relationship, and to talk honestly. And one of the ways to do this is to see a relationship counsellor, because although there's somebody else there, they are duty bound to be confidential, so it's still private. So a relationship counsellor would find out what stage of the model the person is at and identify appropriate interventions for the stage that they're at. So I'll give you an example there. they're talking to a counsellor, and the man says, well, I've confided in my brother, he's just so supportive, him and his wife, they really listen and they really help. And the counsellor says, ding, 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 actually, you need to stop that, because that means you've gone to the social phase, and if you want to save your relationship, you need to bring it back to the dyadic. So they'd say they would encourage them to talk to each other honestly, not seek support from somebody else like a brother and supportive sister-in-law, because although the man finds that supportive, it's now in the public arena, and so the relationship, it's inevitable that it's going to break down. So the counsellor would say, right, bring it back, and would really encourage honest communication, because if you're not honest with each other, then you're going to keep brooding about all those things. If you think, oh, I'm not going to say that I'm fed up about his drinking because I don't want to appear judgmental, but actually, if his heavy drinking or her heavy drinking is what's causing the breakdown, then you need to be honest if you want to save it, or the relationship will break down. A problem with Duck and Rollie's model is that it's culturally biased, and it's an example of an imposed ethic. It doesn't account for arranged marriages or any relationship that considers the concerns of the wider family. So imagine you might go through the first 4 stages of breakdown, but you won't leave because it's either culturally, financially, or religiously unacceptable. So it doesn't account for different for arranged marriages or those other types of relationships where the wider family are concerned. And the last evaluation point are that there are ethical issues in breakdown research. So in any breakdown research, it's a very sensitive subject. You're going to be talking to people who have had relationship breakups, and if you think about privacy as one of the elements of ethics, privacy means that as a participant you have the right to keep your information private. So a participant might have intensely personal information that they don't want to tell to the researcher, and so therefore that would affect the validity and reliability of the results of the research. But what about if they do tell the researcher and then regret it and feel like really upset afterwards, and so that might cause psychological harm? Also, there's the ethical issue with informed consent. So you might get informed consent from your participant to talk about their breakup, but that person will be talking about their ex and might mention names and dates and all sorts of things that the ex-partner hasn't given informed consent to that research, so that's a tricky issue. There's also the ethical issue of physical harm. If someone was in a domestic abuse relationship, a very real possibility might be violence from an ex if they discover the partner's participation in that project and might actually physically harm them. So you have to be incredibly aware of research in that area, that you don't cause any physical harm. And also that you don't cause psychological harm to anybody, because participants might think, oh yeah, I'll go and take part in that research. And then as they're talking about it, a fresh wave of distress at recalling the past relationship might occur. So those are the ethical issues in breakdown research. So that's one theory of the breakdown of romantic relationships. The next theory that we're going to look at is, again, just by Duck, not Duck and Rollie this time, just Duck, 1999. And it's very commonsensical, it's called Reasons for Relationship Breakdown. So this is the next theory, reasons for relationship breakdown. And according to Duck, there are 3 reasons. So we're going to look at those 3 and then evaluate them. So the first one is lack of skills, and they mean lack of interpersonal skills. So interpersonal skills are things like being able to communicate effectively, good eye contact, being able to read the situation that you're in when you're with somebody. So if you lack interpersonal skills, it makes relationships incredibly difficult. And according to Duck, that's a reason that the relationship might break down if you've got poor interpersonal skills. So poor conversationalists, poor indicating their interest in the other person, that means they're unrewarding in their interactions with others. So others perceive them as not being interested in relating, so a relationship tends to break down before it even gets going. So that's one reason for breakdown in relationships: poor communication, poor interpersonal skills. The next reason that Duck identifies is called lack of stimulation. You will have looked at social exchange theory when you were looking at the maintenance or the formation of relationships. And social exchange theory identifies that people look for rewards in relationships, and stimulation is a reward. So lack of stimulation, therefore, would be a reason for relationship breakdown. And Baxter, 1994, provides evidence that lack of stimulation is often quoted when breaking off a relationship. So if you look at this cartoon here, and the woman says, "I'm not bored with my life, I'm bored with our life." She's bored. That's what it means by lack of stimulation. If you're bored, people expect relationships to change and develop, and when they don't, this is seen as justification to end the relationship or start a new one, so have an affair. So a reason for breakdown, according to Duck, is lack of stimulation. It's that you're bored. Your relationship has become stale, it's not going anywhere, and even that you might stop doing the things that you used to do together. The third reason that Duck identified is called maintenance difficulties. And this is talking about things like the physical separation that people experience, so long distance relationships. Shaver et al. 1985 identified that the strain of long distance relationships could actually cause breakdown. Some relationships can survive them, but Duck identifies that actually that could be a reason for breakdown. Common examples are things like people who work in the army, so they're away for maybe months at a time, university students, or anybody who has to work away from their partner. So that's the description of Duck's reasons, and we're going to evaluate them now. And the first evaluation point comes from some research by Boeck-Hout 1999 et al., who were studying extramarital affairs. And they asked undergraduate students to rate various sexual and emotional reasons for a partner to be unfaithful, and found that that people thought that men would be unfaithful for sexual reasons, and that women would be unfaithful for emotional reasons. But both of them, the sexual boredom and lack of attention, was showing that affairs may be the result of a perceived lack of skills, so the interpersonal skills, and or stimulation, so the boredom. So both of these actually support Duck's theory. However, Rolfing 1995 found that long-distance romantic relationships are actually more common than you think, and that 70% of students sampled had experienced at least one long-distance romantic relationship. And probably more importantly, Holt and Stone 1988 found that there was little decrease in relationship satisfaction as long as the lovers are able to reunite regularly. So this suggests that long-distance relationships may not lead to breakdown, as Duck's explanation would suggest. And if you think about the reuniting, not only can we travel very easily in this country in particular, but you could reunite on virtually as well, using FaceTime or Skype or texting or any kind of social media, so that you feel that you are maintaining the relationship and that it isn't long distance. It helps it. The next evaluation point is Cina et al. 2003. So they looked at couples therapy, and particularly something called Couples Coping Enhancement Training, or CCET. So this was to do with like improving the social skills, the interpersonal skills, and couples coping enhancement training does do that. So Cina et al. Found that couples who had had CCET reported significantly higher marital satisfaction than the control group without it. So it demonstrates the importance of the social skills. Another evaluation point is that it is criticised because it doesn't really consider gender differences in breakdown. It just says that everybody's reasons are the same. Whereas Brame and Kassim 1996 found that women were more likely to stress unhappiness and incompatibility as reasons for breakup, while men were more likely to cite sexual withholding. And Akert 1998 found that women had more desire to remain friends after the dissolution, while men prefer to cut ties completely. So Duck's reasons doesn't really incorporate any kind of gender differences. So your homework, if you are my students, you are going to have a timed essay on Friday the 25th of September that is to discuss one or more theories into the breakdown of romantic relationships. It's highly likely that this is going to come up in your exam, so it'd be very beneficial for you to revise it. This book, I've told you all about it, my students, is brilliant for revision for the AQA A specification. Make sure you get the 3rd edition for the 2016 exam. It's got lots of model essays in that you can use, but also it's got lots of structures of essays to help you if you're struggling with writing essays. Remember, this book is not a quick fix. Don't think, oh, I'll just get that in like next April, everything will be fine. Revision does take time, and so the more you do it throughout the year, so if you learn this topic and practice this essay now, then it will be so much easier for you to actually, if it came up in the exam, you'd just be able to write it off. So build up your revision throughout the year is what I'm saying. It's the best way. And if you are watching this in, say, April, then don't panic. Just do what you can, and it'll all be fine. Okay.
You to leave with me now. If you say yes to me, we could just leave here right now. I can show you special things. With you watching my dreams. Just give me something to shout about today. Something new to scream about today. What would you say if I asked you to marry me now? Should you say yes to me? Give me this one sacred vow. You know I am the one, which is why I wrote this song.